Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. Welcome. So let's begin as usual with 5 minutes of motivation and calming meditation. So we'll do this silently and be sure you start with setting up your posture. Make your motivation as wide as possible, including yourself and other beings. And then spend some time calming your mind, being still in your body, focusing on your breath, or you're doing mindfulness practice, whatever works for you to get you just settled and centered. Okay, so let's get started with some review. So yesterday we talked about equanimity, two types of equanimity. One type, which is about keeping a stable and a calm mind in the face of whatever circumstances we're going through. And this is really powerful for our own lives, for our own mental health, and also for our relationships with others and our ability to deal with difficult situations in our lives, having this calm, cool mind. And we talked a bit about how do we develop that? How do we maintain that? And one of the things that we learned is that when you practice on the cushion, when you spend time like we just did, just centering and calming, then we're more likely to carry that over even when we get into more difficult situations where we're with people and they're doing things that are challenging, or we learn about different decisions that have happened that affect our lives, that we're more likely to be able to stay centered and able to touch into our own inner wisdom when we have practiced on the cushion. And the reason for that is what Mingyur Rinpoche talks about is physical, vertical gap. So having a gap between what we are, what we're feeling, what is happening, what we're thinking, and our own awareness or our own consciousness. And when we make a distinction between these two during our meditations, this sort of part of the mind that is observing, and then the part of the mind that is having thoughts, that is having experiences, that is having emotions, that is perceiving external things, and we make a distinction between those two, we see that that part, that awareness, is always present with us, and that it is always calm and it is always still. And we can tap into that part of our minds anytime that we want to. And they also talk about short time, many times. So when we're first developing this and we're working on this type of a mind, that it's not important that we meditate for a whole hour, in the morning. In fact, it's more effective if we do shorter amounts of times, like 10 minutes, every so often throughout the day, that will actually have more effect on how our minds are in our regular, activities, interacting with our family, our friends, at work, all those kinds of things. So this emotional equanimity is about not having a reactive mind. So sometimes when we get triggered, we can have a really short fuse. We can become really overwhelmed very quickly. And then we have what Lam Yeshe calls our yo-yo mind. We go up, we go down, we go up, we go down with whatever external circumstances are. So we're learning to stay calm and not be pulled by the extremes from one emotion to another, because the higher we go, the lower we go, and that affects our overall happiness, our overall peacefulness. If we let ourselves go too high or go too low, then it usually, the lows bring us down more than the highs bring us up. And balance is more about having more of a gentle curve instead of a yo-yo kind of mind. Then we talked about equanimity from the point of view of how we interact with others. So we do have a tendency to judge others and judge our relationships with others and put them kind of in categories, like these are the people that I want to be around, and these are the people that I want very far away from me, and these are the people that I don't care about. And we even, have that in our hearts. We even, whenever we think of someone, we sort of, like with strangers, we just sort of ignore them, and we don't really, we just kind of push it away, especially if there's suffering involved, because we don't really want that kind of suffering. No one wants to bring it on themselves. But actually developing compassion reflects more of how we actually exist. So we've been talking a lot about this concept of selflessness, in the sense that the self doesn't exist as separately, as independently as we believe that it does. and that learning to be see ourselves as more interconnected with us actually brings us greater happiness, because there's no way that we could remove all of our suffering and get all of our happiness if we ignored everybody else. Okay, because we don't exist that way. It would be impossible to do that. And even what they find, and what you will find, is that the more that you do open your heart to others and wish for them to be happy, the happier you are. It just comes back to you, because it's a reflection of reality, of how we actually exist as connected to each other. So looking at these labels, sometimes when we make judgments about people, we talked about the fact that it's projections of ourselves. So parts of ourselves that we feel like we don't necessarily own. So someone really annoys us, because of something that they're doing, and it really bothers us, even to an extreme, in a way that it doesn't affect us particularly directly, but we seem to just hold it with us, like this annoyance. That's usually a sign that there's some projection going on, that we're putting our parts of ourselves that we have not accepted, or parts of ourselves that we have not even allowed to exist in ourselves, onto someone else, and saying they have that quality, and therefore I don't want them around me, instead of looking at our wholeness, our who we are. Or maybe it's a part of ourselves we've never accepted, or maybe it's a part of ourselves that we've moved beyond, but we're still sort of a little embarrassed, or that we had that part of ourselves in the past, and so it's still kind of there. And then we can look at equanimity in terms of that the labels that we give people, these judgments that we give people, are based on how they treat us. So it's from a very self-centered kind of view, instead of a view that takes their point of view, from looking at it from their perspective, not in how they treat us, but from their point of view, they want to be happy and don't want suffering. And everything that they do, even if it looks really harmful to themselves, and it looks and harms others, they're actually, this is what they have figured out, they feel like is the way to get over their suffering, or to make themselves happy. And sometimes people are really, really confused, and they do things that really hurt them. So starting to see that perspective, we can develop more kindness, more generosity, more compassion, more understanding for people, when we know that their intention is the same as for everybody. They want to be happy and don't want suffering. So then we talked a bit about exchanging self and others. So this is another way in which we develop bodhicitta. So let's look at that screen just to. So this exchanging self and others has to do with how we define ourselves as separately, and how we can start to redefine ourselves in a different way. Because remember, there is a self that exists. But like Lama Zopa said, it's really interesting. He talks about, I'm going to take this off so you can see my hands. So he talks about how we see ourselves now in this extreme way as independent and separate, that is like on this extreme. And when we look at how we actually exist and the distance between those two, it's as if this side of how we actually exist is so far away from how we see ourselves now as independent, permanent, unitary, somehow having a substance that is separate from the body and mind, and this idea of a merely labeled self. It's as if this self does not exist at all. That's the experience of when we start to get a sense of how that mere self actually exists. It's as if it is non-existent. Now, it's not non-existent, because that would be nihilism, but sometimes we have to even exaggerate on the more sense of this more nihilistic extreme in order to bring this one more into balance. Okay. So one of the ways we can do this when we're looking at this exchanging self and others, is this equalizing of self and others. This idea that I would not be a self if there would not be an other. So even conceptually, the idea of a self, that there is a me, precludes or requires that there be an other. Because with language, the way language works, if you don't have a self, if an other doesn't exist, there wouldn't be a self. They are intertwined, they are interconnected. So I could never define, if I was everybody else, if there was no such thing as another, there wouldn't be a self. Does that make sense? Okay. So this equalizing, that others are absolutely necessary in order for us to exist. And then equalizing, like we talked about, all beings want to be happy and don't want suffering. And then we move into this exchanging self and others, where we start to see that, okay, on this conventional level, there is a self that exists and there are others who exist. Okay, so we accept that on this conventional level without looking too deeply. But when we even look at from a relative level, we see that others are infinite. And when we compare this me with all these others, and we start looking at the happiness of me versus the happiness of others, it's like, it's practically incomparable. It's like, how can you spend so much time, this proportionately, like huge amount of time on this one little being, when there are so many others, that exist, that are also a part of us. So that's when we start to do this exchanging self and others, where others become more important than the self, which doesn't mean that we totally ignore the self. And something I didn't talk about yesterday is that some of us who are, we're reinforced to give all our time and energy and focus to others. Oftentimes our motivation for that is not necessarily actually about others. It's more about ourselves, in the sense that we have been trained to feel like, in order to be approved, in order to be loved, in order to be, a good person, we have to not be selfish. And so our motivation for benefiting others is about how it makes us feel, or how the approval we're getting. And so sometimes that's where it can get really skewed, in terms of, we start giving up ourselves completely for others, thinking that's what we should do, and thinking that that's what is going to make us feel okay. When in fact, we have to have, as this instrument, we have to be someone who can benefit others. And if we are constantly ignoring ourselves completely, we won't ever have any energy or any space to be able to benefit others. And bodhicitta, it's very fundamental, definition. The very definition of bodhicitta is that we have to actualize our own potential. We have to become Buddhas in order to really benefit others. So how could we ignore a self, or, give everything away, or somehow, make ourselves sick and think that that's going to benefit others? Because that's not what bodhicitta is about. In fact, we have to be strong, we have to be powerful, and we have to get ourselves free. We have to get ourselves liberated if we're going to bring anybody else to liberation. So this exchanging self and others is about this self that is separate, that is contracted, that is, me only. And it becomes more about how others are just as much a part of me. And it's a balance. It's hard with language, because once again, we get into this, this dualism, where language is inadequate to describe the actual existence of things, because things exist in a non-dual way. They don't exist as separateness, even though that's how language makes them out to be. In order to have a concept of something, you have to say all the things that that concept is not in order to have a concept. So language automatically does it. So we can use language, we can use our wisdom, you know, we can use this conceptual mind to get us very close to the experience of non-duality. But at some point, of course, we have to let go of the language and we have to simply experience it. But language can get us close, and we get familiar with the concepts and we get familiar with talking around it in order to get to, you know, right up to close to that experience. And then it's the combination of this calm abiding, this shamatha, with this analytical meditation that can push us over the edge, you know, into that direct experience of some of these concepts that we're talking about. And so bodhicitta and emptiness become they support each other. They, you know, it's not just that over here we're benefiting sentient beings and over here we're learning about, you know, non-dualism and, you know, the emptiness of how things appears. We have to bring them together. Okay. So then we talked about and did the meditation on Tonglen, which is the way in which we train our minds to be able to start to focus on others' needs instead of taking us out of that only me kind of attitude, that self-centered attitude. So today I want to talk about ethics, ethical discipline. So when we started this course on the first day 2 weeks ago, this Going Deeper one, we shared a file with you that had the different vehicles, the Theravada vehicle, the Mahayana vehicle, and the Tantric vehicle. And within the Mahayana vehicle, there is listed the 6 perfections, or the 6 paramitas, they're sometimes called. So Felipe just shared the file again so you can see it. And what these are, this is about the path or the practices that a bodhisattva engages in. And so this is how we talked about the small scope in terms of the goal being a better future life and the focus being on precious human rebirth and death and impermanence. And then we talked about the middle scope, getting free from samsara, becoming liberated, how we can meditate on emptiness and looking at karma, cause and effect, in order to get free and liberated from samsara. And now these last few days, we've been working on the great scope, which is this focus on bodhicitta and full enlightenment in order to bring all beings to enlightenment. And the activities that someone who has bodhicitta, who has this motivation and has taken bodhisattva vows, and we're going to talk about vows, what kind of practices they engage in. So there are 6 of them. So the first one is generosity, the second one is ethical discipline, the third one is patience, the fourth one is joyous effort, the fifth one is concentration, and the sixth one is wisdom. So we're going to talk today about the 2 that we haven't touched on yet, ethical discipline and joyous effort, because we've talked about patience in relation to anger, and we didn't talk about generosity that much, but that's a pretty easy one. Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. Okay, so let's talk about ethical discipline. So ethical discipline is the foundation of concentration. One has to be engaging in refraining from harming others in order to have a peaceful mind, because we have this, you know, little thing called the conscience. And sometimes people are very good at suppressing their conscience, but in general, those people who don't pay attention to their conscience don't typically have a very peaceful mind. So when we're kind to others, when we avoid harming others, we tend to actually have better relationships with others, which makes us feel safer, which makes, you know, trust grow in us. And so ethical discipline becomes this basis of creating circumstances where we can feel safe enough to do this internal work, to do this concentration, okay? So some of the benefits of ethical discipline, and we'll talk about what ethical discipline is in a second, but the benefits first. So a peaceful mind, so you don't carry a lot of guilt around, you don't worry about, like people getting back at you because you've hurt them, okay? You have better future karmic results. Of course, if you are avoiding harming others, you create the conditions for others to not harm you. You have more respect from others. Others tend to see you as someone who is trustworthy, someone who can be honored, someone who is to be emulated. Because it's very interesting. And my favorite example of this is in the movie Meet Joe Black. So this is a movie with Brad Pitt and Anthony Hopkins, and it's an old one. I think it's like the 90s or something that it came out. And Joe Black is deaf, and he is coming to take Anthony Hopkins. And my favorite character is Anthony Hopkins, and he's a businessman, and he has so much integrity. He has so much he's just so respectful to the people around him, to he's trying to work on his relationships with his family, but you just see that he's so successful because he has been honest, and he has been a good father, and he's been a good partner in businesses, and he's just kind of an amazing character. And that the respect that he engenders, and all the people who care about him and love him, because he carries these values within him. And this is one of the benefits of ethical discipline, because we even have words for it. When people don't, when people are manipulative and lie and trick and try to get out of things, we call them slimy, which is like, yeah, not so attractive, right? So, and then ethical discipline, we have fewer bad habits. So in general, when ethical discipline takes it, we take it to a deeper level than simply, not killing. We can go to a deeper level to, even harming in subtle ways. So ethical discipline can go much deeper than just like the 10 non-virtues. Okay, so let's look at those. Well, no, let me talk a little bit more about this. So the Buddha very kindly, so we don't have the capacity to be able to know all the different causes and conditions that go into any one particular karmic action. So when we're making decisions about what is right and wrong, we can only do the best we can from our point of view, right? So we can have as positive intention as we can, and we can try to, use our wisdom as much as we can, but we can't always know exactly what the results of our actions are going to be. So the Buddha said, okay, you're not there yet. You don't have that kind of wisdom. So I'm going to teach you some guidelines that you should follow. Now, these are not like laws because the Buddha said so. It's not like because the Buddha said you shouldn't do this, therefore it's a wrong action. It's because these things have the potential to create negative karma for us and to influence people in negative ways. And so he gave us, and it's very, well, not surprising probably, but these ethical disciplines, these non-virtues that we're going to talk about, are actually very similar with all the other world religions, so we talk about the 10 commandments, it's like very similar. And so it's interesting, all of us have come up with these same kind of things, and all the spiritual leaders who came and taught. So we have 3 of body: killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So killing, taking a life, and this is considered the most powerful one, the most non-virtuous one, because what is most precious to any being is their life. So the most harm that and these are all about not harming, the most harm that we could do to someone would be to take what is most precious from them, which is their life. Okay, so it becomes about how our relationships are with others. Stealing, taking what is not given, Sexual misconduct is mostly about rape, okay? So using your sexuality to harm others. And then they also talk about adultery. When two people have agreed that they're going to, you know, only share this intimacy with each other, and then they break that promise, then that hurts people in a big way, okay? Lying, not telling the truth, harsh speech, using our words to harm others. Divisive speech is when we talk about someone behind their back, and we do it in a way so that the person that we're talking to feels anger or doesn't or rejects the person that we're talking about. So we're dividing two people with our speech, okay? And then idle chatter is just wasting our words, just talking about whatever without very much meaning or without very much purpose. And you know this when you've been around people who just talk and talk and talk and talk and don't really mean anything, that you stop listening to them. It becomes like, you know, you waste their time, you waste their energy. And then ill will has to do with in the mind, carrying resentment, carrying a grudge, carrying hatred in our minds. Covetousness has to do with the extensive greed. So we talked about grasping and craving, and we could take it even to a further level where covetousness becomes about, you know, somebody else has something that you want, and you spend all your time trying to figure out, manipulate how to get it. And then wrong view has more to do with if you're a Buddhist. It has less to do if you haven't taken refuge in Buddhism. It has to do with having extreme doubt. So we should have questioning. We should examine what the Buddha has said, but to completely close our minds off from the Buddha's teachings, any part of the Buddha's teachings is considered wrong view. And they talk about this in particular in relation to things like reincarnation and karma and emptiness, that if you just like reject those doctrines, that's considered, it can really, as a Buddhist, it can really create a lot of problems for yourself, because then you aren't seeing the world from that perspective, which is actually very beneficial when you're developing and growing on the path. Okay, so the opposite of these non-virtues, of course, are all the virtues. So we talk about ethical discipline in three ways. One is refraining from the non-virtue. One is engaging in the opposite, the virtue. So the opposite of killing then is protecting life. And then the third one is benefiting others. And sometimes when we're engaging in the virtue, we are also benefiting others. But it's these three levels of ethical discipline. Okay, so vows. Let's look at what vows are. All right. So a vow is making and holding a promise to refrain from a non-virtue. Okay, so you make a promise, and it creates an imprint in the mind that continues to have an effect even when we are not consciously engaged in the virtue or refraining from the non-virtue. So it continues to have an effect on our minds just by making this promise. And it's very powerful. Holding a virtue can be a vow can be very powerful. And vows are not just for monks and nuns. So there is a refuge vow, there are bodhisattva vows, there are also layperson vows. So a layperson is someone who, sometimes they call them householders. Many modern Buddhists from Western countries and even in India who didn't grow up in Buddhism, we have fewer and fewer monks and nuns these days. So most of the people that I teach to are lay people. And so lay people also have vows that they can take. And it's not like you just take the vow once and then you forget about it, okay? It's that you reinforce them. So you remind yourself on a regular basis that you've taken these vows, and these actually keep them strong. So the layperson vows are the promise for the rest of your life. You take these vows, the promise not to kill a human being. And we don't say, I promise not to kill anything, because that would be really hard to keep. Now, of course, you do try not to kill anything, but the vow that you have taken is you will not kill a human being. And then you will not steal anything of value. You will not lie about your spiritual accomplishments, because this can be very misleading to others and can be a source of real manipulation, lying about these things. And then not engaging in sexual misconduct, so the rape and adultery. And then, is that the right? I think that's right. And then the last one is intoxicants, not taking intoxicants. And when you take these vows, you don't have to take all 5. And the one about intoxicants, it depends on who gives them to you. So you take them with the Lama. Sometimes some teachers say absolutely no intoxicants whatsoever. You know, like they talk about, you know, as much alcohol as could fit on a blade of grass. That you can't even take that much. But His Holiness, when he gives these vows, he says that because culturally, for some people, you know, drinking wine with dinner, you know, is an accepted sort of way of interacting, that it's not getting intoxicated from it. And intoxicants are not like negative in and of themselves. They aren't naturally negative actions like killing is. But the problem is that they release our inhibitions, and they lead us to do all the other negative all the other negative actions. So they often tell the story when they're teaching this of the monk who was going around, and he was taking his alms bowl around, and he came to the home of a prostitute. You know, he was begging, and the prostitute said, you know, okay, you know, I'll give you food, but first you have to either, you know, have sex with me, or you have to kill my goat, or you have to drink this glass of beer. And so the monk said, okay, which is the least, how horrible thing that I could do. I guess he could have left. I never thought about that before. He could have left and gone to another house, but maybe he had to stay. But anyway, so he said, okay, I'm going to drink the beer, right? This is the least worst thing that I could do. So he drinks the beer and he gets a little drunk, and then he ends up killing the goat and sleeping with her anyway. So that's the story of why intoxicants are not naturally bad, but they lead you to difficult things. Okay, so those were the 5 vows. So the Bodhisattva vow has to do with engaging in these 5 perfections. It also has to do with this promise that our activities are going to be about becoming enlightened in order to benefit others. So it becomes a commitment to that, a commitment to expand our love, our warm heart, our compassion for all beings. And then it's a commitment that we're going to use our time well, that we're going to, make space in our life to develop ourselves, to become the very best people that we can become in order to be of greatest benefit to others. Okay, so let's talk now. Oh, okay, so there's this amazing program. One of the things that all right, so let me just introduce it first. So it's called the 16 Guidelines, and it was developed by the Foundation for the Development of Compassion and Wisdom. And it has these 4 wisdom themes: how we think, how we act, how we relate to others, and how we find meaning. And within each one of them, there is a value. So there's delight, which is like rejoicing. There's humility, there's contentment, there's patience, how we act, how do we use our speech, being kindness, friendliness, caring, generosity, giving, honesty, how we relate to others in terms of respect, gratitude, repaying the kindness, loyalty, forgiveness, not holding resentment, for both for ourselves and for others, and how we find meaning. So aspiration, what do we strive for? Principles, what kind of values are we developing? You know, courage, being, you know, steadfast in the face of difficulties, and then service, benefiting others. And so this this program was developed by this Foundation for the Development of Compassion and Wisdom, which is a branch of the FPMT, but it's a secular program. So although it's based in Buddhist values, it doesn't use any of the Buddhist religious sort of worldview concepts. It's more about how do we teach and how do we enact values in our life. And there's a really interesting psychotherapy system that it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it talks about the importance, and Stephen Covey talks about this too in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about the importance of values in our lives and how do we focus on those values. You know, where do we give priority, and how do we develop these qualities in ourselves, you know, of honesty, of generosity. And it used to be that typically it was in church that we would learn these values, you know, do unto others as they would do unto you, or in temple, or, you know, whatever, within religious systems, institutionalized religions. But these days, more and more people are not interested in institutionalized religions, but we still need values in order to relate to others, in order to have a harmonious society. And yeah, so so one way that we can do this is through this secular program, and they just came out with the 16 guidelines for children's and teens, and you can find this on their website. It's I think it's compassionandwisdom.org, or you can just you know, Google 16 guidelines. But they have programs, you know, to teach you, to help you integrate these values into your lives. And it's kind of an amazing program. Okay, so let's go on. Talk about joyous effort. Okay, so joyous effort, this next paramita, perfection. The opposite of joyous effort is laziness. Okay, so laziness, we talk about 3 different types of laziness. The first one being procrastination. So there's also a traditional story that, or the saying that they have with this, that when people are very young and they're learning about Buddhism, they think, oh, I have lots and lots of time, I can practice later, no problem. I have all these years to, you know, develop my meditation practice, to work on my values. So they put it off. And then when they get to be middle-aged, they have too many responsibilities. So they're too busy. They have their family, and they have their home, and they have their career, and they have all this. They have no time to practice, right? So they think, oh, I'll practice later. I'll practice later. And then when they're old, they can't practice because they can't sit anymore. They can't, you know, see anymore. They can't, you know, it's very, very difficult. The memory starts to go. So the moral of the story is, practice now. Don't put it off till later. Another type of laziness is attachment to useless activities. For me, I always think of 2 things I think of. One, I think of as video games, right? I think of those, the amount of time we could spend on video games, you know, or watching TV, of course, you know, that this is a useless activity. And the other one that I think of is that I used to think that all these errands I would run and all this organizing that I would do in my life to make things just perfect. And that this is also attachment to useless activities, because it seemed like keeping busy, I was actually doing something. But in fact, they say that we spend all this time decorating our prison cell. So it's like samsara is a prison cell, and we spend all this time trying to make it more beautiful, trying to arrange it, you know, arranging the furniture in our prison cell, instead of figuring out how to get out and working to get free of it. And then discouragement is a view of ourselves that we just can't do it, that it's beyond us. Okay. And that's this belief that, and I had this morning in this class when I was teaching this, there was a really good question about this, because we were talking about burnout. And one of the things that we were talking about was this permission to rest, and permission to, to relax, because relaxation and rest are important. And when do they go from relaxation and rest into laziness? And how can we balance, balance this, the amount of time we do need to, to rejuvenate ourselves in order to be of benefit to others, and how, when does it go over into we're just wasting time? And one of the things that we were talking about was how, when we're resting, if we don't think that we deserve it, if we're putting ourselves down for resting or relaxing, then that makes us, feel bad, and doesn't allow us any energy to then start again, to re-engage, to then finish with the resting and the relaxation, and see that now it's time for us to start again and go again, that we have had enough rest. And so how do we find, when have we rested and relaxed enough, and when do we need to start going, again? And of course, it's going to be different for everybody. Some people, I'm thinking of my precious teacher, Venerable Rabina, who has huge amounts of energy and just goes and goes and goes and goes all the time, and I'm just not like her. There's no way that I could do what she does. And I just rejoice that she's able to do it. And at the same time, I accept that that's not me. I have different strengths, I have different qualities, and energy is not one of them. But putting myself down for it doesn't help either. So this expectation that I should somehow be Wonder Woman doesn't make sense. But if we are in laziness, one of the things we can do, developing joyous effort, is this process. Okay. So the first thing we do, just like when we're starting an exercise program, the first thing, before we even join the gym, before we even, go out and start walking or running or doing yoga or whatever, we usually think about the benefits. We think, why do I even want to do this? It's usually because we think we're going to get something out of it, right? That it's going to make us more flexible, or it's going to give us more energy, or it's going to help us deal with stress, or, so we think about the benefits. And that inspires us, it motivates us, it gets us into actually going to the gym, right? And then we do the practice, we start doing the workout, right? And we trust in the benefits for a while, even though there may be some pain involved, or there may be some, some difficulties involved. We start actually doing it. And then after a while, we start to experience the results. So we feel better. We feel stronger. Maybe we lose a couple pounds. Maybe, we find that we're not as agitated and upset and anxious as we usually are. And that reinforces the benefits. So then again, we become more inspired. We think about the benefits of that we've experienced. We become inspired. We practice some more. We experience the results. So it becomes this positive cycle that gets us out of the laziness. So sometimes the only thing we can do at the beginning is just remember the benefits of practice. So the benefits of meditation, the benefits of challenging our misconceptions, about how things exist, the benefits of opening our heart and becoming more kind to others, practicing more generosity, practicing more humility, practicing more, equalizing and exchanging self and others. What are the benefits of these things? And that will inspire us to start to do it more, to study more. This whole thing that I've been talking about, we often call the Dharma. So thinking about the benefits of turning our minds toward the Dharma, and then becoming inspired by that. What are the benefits? How is this going to make myself and others so much more happier? and then we practice, and then we experience the results. Okay, so let's do a breakout group. So it looks like we can do the full 50 groups. And the question is, how do you motivate yourself to change? So let's have a little discussion about this. How do you motivate yourself to change, to become a better person? Because I'm sure everybody has good ideas about this. So share that with each other. And then we'll come back and we'll do some Q&A.
Should we do the full 10 minutes, Venerable, or just 7?
Yes, yes, we have time for the full 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in, and we'll spend a little bit of time doing some questions before we do the meditation.
Okay, we have one question from SG. I'm muting you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So my question is about this kind of attitude that we're talking about and trying to build this within ourselves. Is it better to develop this attitude in isolation till we are able to act from a place of love and kindness? I mean, because I'm going to talk from my experience. So I have been doing this course with you for a while now, and I've been acutely aware of how I've been behaving with others, with people who I love, and what are my patterns. And but it's very hard for me still, and I still see myself falling back into the same patterns and talking to people the same way, maybe because I'm angry with them, they've hurt me. And so I just want to know if what would you recommend? Would you recommend that a person first develops themselves to a certain extent in isolation and then goes out into the world and interacts with people from a space of love and kindness? Or is it something that you have to practice continually? And if you're falling back into the same patterns, then how do you deal with it? I just wanted to...
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to change, and it can be very frustrating when you fall back into the old habits really easily when you're still trying. I think it depends on if you can. So I traditionally, from a Buddhist perspective, we do take time to, we go into retreat. So we do remove ourselves from others, and we spend time developing our wisdom and our compassion separate, outside of our regular lives. And then but we still have to go back into interacting with others at some point and practice it there. And then we go back into retreat and we focus on it there, and then we go and we try it and work with it. And then, so it's definitely a back and forth kind of thing. I think that being gentle with yourself is going to be really important, that knowing that the habits that we've developed we've been, we're talking lifetimes of development, not just this one life. So that's a long time to have developed these habits. So we're not going to break them in a month. It's not going to change in a month. So we have to be gentle with ourselves and not get discouraged and not give up. That's, one of the things His Holiness says is never give up. no matter what, never give up. And even if you can only do a little, you know, you can only do 10 minutes, and you can only, you know, maybe once, you know, in your whole interaction with your family member, you know, once you were able to stop yourself from saying something that you know you shouldn't say, then you did that, you know, and you rejoice in that. And you said, oh, good, you know, this one thing I was aware of at this moment, and I stopped myself. Now, you may have spent the next, you know, 20 minutes not doing so well, but at least once you stopped yourself and you focus on that and you rejoice in that. And that actually grows that. It makes you want to do that more.
Right.
So yeah, if you can, you know, do some retreat, or spend, you know, say, you know, if you have to be with them all day, you know, say, you know, I'm going to spend an hour by myself, just doing it now. And if you explain it to them, most of the time they're like fine with it. You know, it's like, I just need time by myself. I just need to be myself by myself, and then I can be a nicer person to you.
Right, right, right. Thank you. Thank you so
Sure,
much.
sure.
Venerable, there's a sweet message for you. It says, from my 11-year-old son to Venerable Drolma, you're better than Wonder Woman.
Oh, sweet.
That's so lovely.
Yeah, I like that picture of Wonder Woman.
Okay, let me see another question. I'm going to mute. Oh, this one was already asked. Okay, so Samir, you can now go with your question.
Hi, Venerable. I was reading somewhere, you know, what are the steps to become a monk. So in that, there it was mentioned that you have to take refuge, like you should have taken refuge 2 years from the time you want to start monkhood. So I want to know what are the refuge vows and how are they taken? Like who gives it? Like how it is done.
Okay. So we're going to talk about refuge tomorrow and what refuge is. There's also a booklet that if you go on the FPMT website, I think you can get it there. The foundation store with the FPMT has a book on the refuge vows, so you can read a little, and I think you can download it for either nothing or a small donation. So you can look at what the vows there, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow. And it is, you do take it in front of what they call a refuge preceptor. So you do take it with someone like a lama or a geshe or a teacher, you know, someone who you can take it with.
Thank you.
Sure, welcome. One more?
Okay, there's one that's asking me to read. Wait 1 second. If we find ourselves in a situation, and then it continues, in which we must be in an environment where the non-virtues are habits of others, how can we best avoid this affecting us and practice compassion without letting their non-virtues negatively impact us?
Yeah, it's really hard. And they talk about that, you know, in the traditional text, they talk about staying away from friends who will get you into trouble. You know, like they talk about avoiding non-virtuous friends. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Yeah, I think, how have I handled this? I tend to stay quiet when people are doing things that I don't approve of. So I don't necessarily like condemn them and tell them, you know, that what they're doing is so wrong. I do tend to just withdraw and not engage in it and not encourage it and not, you know, rejoice in what they're doing. And sometimes that creates a little bit of a wall between us, but it also, I think it helps them to look at what they're doing a little more closely when I don't say anything at all and I kind of leave the situation if possible. And the way in which I then don't, I mean, we have to be strong enough to be willing to tolerate other people's disapproval, right? If we're not engaging, say we're changing and we've stopped engaging in a negative action that we used to engage in, and they think, oh, you're just being a goody two shoes, I think was what uh, the expression that I was always faced with peers when I was a kid. You know, that somehow holier than thou was another one, that somehow I think I'm better than everybody else because I am practicing ethical discipline. And so that's why I try not to make it really obvious, and I don't try to show off that I'm somehow acting in a way that that is different from them. But it's an inner strength. It's definitely like developing a commitment to our values, a commitment to doing the right thing, and then that being more powerful than what other people think or what other people their views of us. That it becomes more of, again, this internal compass that I develop, that I know that this is right, and that you can't, I know what is true north, and you can't sway me. And even if you don't recognize that, I'm sorry. If yeah, and eventually they see and they question their own behavior, and they often then have the opportunity to also choose the right path. If you're willing to stay the course, to follow what you think is right, then they're more likely to also engage in that behavior.
All right.
Okay, so let's do some
Want to do
meditation.
one more?
Oh, we're running pretty late.
Okay.
Yeah, let's if they wanted to, they can put it in the chat, and their email, and I can email the answer if it's that urgent.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, there's a bunch of questions, but yeah, so if there's any urgent ones, you can leave your email and I'll pass it to Venerable.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go back to a comfortable position, everyone, to get started with the meditation. And making sure that your back is loosely straight, that you're feeling comfortable, grounded, stable. And so take a couple of minutes, as we usually do, to settle down in the body, to allow your body to become relaxed, free of tension, free of tightness. Bringing yourself back to balance, allowing the body to go back to its natural state. Taking a few deep breaths in order to allow the tension to dissolve and release it. So in order to go into this meditation of joyous effort, now you can let go of observing the body, simply let it rest. And as we go through the points that we need to contemplate on, try to make it as personal as possible, bringing up examples and experiences from your own life, checking to see if these points are true for yourself. So as we've heard in the presentation, joyous effort is taking delight in what is virtuous and worthwhile. And in order to have space in our lives to cultivate joyous effort, we must first counteract the three types of laziness. The first one being procrastination and sleep. Do you often put off what you can do today for some time in the future? Do you often find yourself saying, I'll do this later or some other time, when you could actually do it at that moment? And then, do you sleep more than necessary? We all need to rest for sure, but do you find yourself taking very long naps or sleeping more than your body needs? Or do you find being attached to laying down or being idle? Which brings us to the second category of attachment to useless activities. How much of your daily time do you spend on entertainment? Watching movies, playing games, doing things which are not necessarily benefiting you. What about not having your priorities in order? Do you often do things which are unimportant first? Are you often busy with unimportant activities? which again bring you no real benefit, especially from the point of view of spiritual practice. And what about discouragement and putting ourselves down? Are there times where you don't even try something? Where you give up before even trying? Or even instances where you don't trust even your own Buddha potential, your own potential to develop yourself. And so try to develop a sense of courage and joy so that you can engage in the three types of joyous effort, which are withstanding discomfort to work for others' welfare, and doing all constructive actions motivated by bodhicitta, and working to benefit others. So think in this way, trying to give rise to an appreciation for joyous effort by remembering the benefits of doing practice and working for others' benefit. I can develop faith and believe that this makes my life worthwhile and meaningful. Think of all the benefits that practice brings to you. And think as well that through developing understanding and conviction in this path, I can develop a strong aspiration to continue. The more you know, the more you understand, the more things make sense. And it can motivate you. to implement joy suffering in your practice. Once I get a taste of the happiness that practicing this path can bring, I will develop the wish to attain the goals that I'm working towards. And having clarity about the goals and an honest wish to make these changes in my mind will inspire a steady, strong practice in my life. I will see that this is essential to my life. And finally, along the path, we experience joy and flexibility. And those qualities can spur us on continuously. You can bring to mind some experiences of joy that we've had related to spiritual practice after a good session of meditation, or the feeling when you refrain for doing a negative action. It would make sense to strive with joyous effort to continue to bring these experiences in our life. So seeing the benefits of engaging in practice with joyous effort, taking delight in what is virtuous, set an intention to the best of your ability to use this as much as possible. Whenever you have the chance to engage in some virtue, doing it with a happy mind, delighted in doing something which is worthwhile. So coming out of the meditation, now we move to the dedication. May all beings everywhere, plagued by the sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be free from their ailments. Whatever diseases are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, everyone. So nice to see you. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you tomorrow. Same time. Bye.
Bye.